Thank you so much, Deb and Steve. Thanks to all of you for being here. It's really exciting to see so many people across the screen. There's 4 pages on mine, and so I can't see all of your faces, but I'm going to scroll through while people are talking. I'm really excited to talk about this film. I'm excited about the panel that we have, who I'm going to have introduce themselves in just a minute. I just want to note for you, though, I have some questions prepared that I want to ask the panel to get us started, but we would love to hear from you. And so you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat button. If you just write questions in there, I'm going to be looking at those questions along the way and trying to incorporate some of those questions as we go. And then at the end, if we have a little bit of time, we'll pick up some more of those and have the panel talk about those as well. So as you have questions throughout the conversation, please drop those questions into the chat and I'll be grabbing them from there. So I would love to have you participate in that way. So before we get started, I want to go ahead and give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm going to go in the order that's on my screen. And so, Imam, Hasic, will you start by just introducing yourself and tell everyone just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I am Mohamed Hasic, Imam and Executive Director for Islamic Community Center. I'm in St. Louis about only 25 years. And I serve the mostly Bosnian community, but also many others background. Like my Friday sermon, is basically 50% Bosnian and about 50% many others nationality. And I have basically every Friday to see that the people from different background making a friendship and greeting each other and so on.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. So excited to be here. I'm Sonia Williams. I'm the Dean of the Seminary here at Eden Theological Seminary, as well as Assistant Professor of Practical Theology. I am also an administrator for a community chaplaincy program here at Eden and an interfaith chaplain who really seeks to create joy. And so I am ecstatic about being in this conversation this evening.
Thanks, Dr. Williams. Rori?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rori Picker-Neiss, and I serve as Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council here in St. Louis, which essentially means that it's my job to build relationships between the Jewish community and other civic, ethnic, political, and religious groups and work together on issues that are important for our Jewish community and important to the region at large. I am ordained in the Orthodox Jewish community, which is kind of unusual in and of itself. And so I use the title Maharat, which is a whole other story to talk about a different evening, but I'm really excited to be with all of you.
Thank you so much. And then finally, Dr. Niles.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Damayanthi Niles. The work that I do here at Eden is I'm the professor of constructive theology, and I am the Alan and Dottie Miller Chair for Mission and Peace. And for 3.5 months more only, I'm the interim academic dean. And let some other sucker do it for a while. But where my heart is in, I am a scholar in Christianity. I also have studied and am a scholar in Hinduism and Buddhism, and I come from a Theravada Buddhism country. This is where I arrived from many years ago, but Buddhism is a very critical part of how I understand my Christian faith, and even more so, Hinduism is a very critical part of how I understand my faith. I'm also a liberation theologian and have had the honor of meeting the Dalai Lama and working with people like Desmond Tutu who do work in faith and reconciliation. That's my background.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niles. And just again, I'm Matt Miofsky. I'm the pastor of the Gathering, United Methodist Church here in St. Louis. I was lucky enough to be a student of Archbishop Desmond Tutu's during my time at Emory University, where I went to seminary. He was in residence there. And so it was great for me to get a chance to just watch the film and hear his voice again. But I wanted to start, and thank you to all our panelists too, for introducing yourselves, for your time here. And I wanted to start off just kind of big picture. I mean, we all watched the film. There was so much in there. I was just kind of curious if there was a moment that made a particular impression on you, or was there an aha moment for you, or just a part of the film that really stuck out to you? What made an impact on you as you now have sat with this film for a few days? And I'll let whoever wants to start jump in and start.
I'm Carol Rose, and I would like to start by saying that the entire film was incredible, but that I think that the moment when the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu held hands and prayed as they listened to the little girl tell her story was the most moving for me. Thank you.
Does one of our panelists want to share? Dr. Williams, was there a moment in the film that just sort of struck you or made an impression on you?
Yeah, it was. I look to both of these individuals as teachers, and so I entered watching the film as a student, and so I had my pen and my paper right beside the film, and the whole film I got engulfed in it, but there was one line that I wrote, and I think that was the only line that I wrote the whole time because I just kept watching and listening. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, when people decide to be free, absolutely nothing will stop them. And that just really stopped me in my tracks. And so that has been what has stayed with me since watching the film. One, it allows a possibility that freedom is possible and accessible, but it also asks the question of what is my own personal responsibility in seeking that freedom. And so I just absolutely love that line.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Williams. And thanks to all of you for dropping your answers in the chat. I'm going to let some of our other panelists answer with the significant moment for them. Imam, was there a moment of the film that really stuck out to you or made an impression on you?
It was so many moments, but I remember when they talk about forgiveness, when they said forgive and don't forget, and kind of learning from the experience from before. Forgiveness is very, very important part of the life of the human being, especially if you have the serious things, you realize you did a mistake, you honestly asking for forgiveness, and people all the time forgive you. But if you be ignorant and kind of did a mistake, but you don't recognize, it gets really opposite way, nobody in that case will forgive, and the kind of interaction is becoming stiff, But when person sincerely asking for forgiveness, everybody almost forgive you.
Thank you, Imam. Dr. Niles, is there a moment for you that made a particular impression?
It was a moment. It's actually a thread of two men who saw everything that should have made them hopeless. And they couldn't give up hope. I mean, it wasn't that they were trying to be hopeful. They just couldn't give it up. It held on to them. And I found that deeply powerful because we get the ability and the practices that they use to just, I don't know if one of them said it or if they intonated it, is we don't find hope. Hope resides within us. And I found that comforting among everything else. I found that deeply, deeply comforting.
Yeah, agreed. Rori, how about for you? Is there a moment?
So I had a similar experience actually as what Dr. Williams described of sitting there with a notepad, and then when I looked back, there was one thing that I had written down because I was so engrossed in it, and I'm looking back at what I had written, and I wrote, sometimes you're the one in the room, whatever your strengths, and you have to let what wants to happen happen. Mm-hmm. That was the point for me, that I had to just kind of pause the film, because I to me also there was this call for all of us It's easy to look at this as here are these two great men and look at what all they've accomplished. And sure, if I was given all of those lessons or opportunities or challenges or whatever it is, right? And they were saying, no, like, you don't have to be born to greatness, or you don't have to be, it's not about your destiny. It's about you're the one in the room, and you take the gifts and you have to do with them whatever you're called upon to do with them. And that really took my breath away.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I want to hop in. I want to get kind of straight into really what I think the crux of the movie was, right in the title. It was about joy. And, I think woven throughout the film were both implicit and explicit sort of definitions of joy, or what joy is. And I was writing down all of those as we go along. And I was just curious if each of you would share, when you hear that word joy, how do you understand joy? And how does your own tradition sort of inform the way that you understand just that word? What are we talking about when we say the word joy? Dr. Niles, do you want to lead us off on that one?
Yikes.
You're a true theologian, so I figured you can answer this.
Well, this true theologian can't answer it, but so maybe I'm not a true theologian after all. But joy for me is feeling, and I do understand that I'm a South Asian Christian, not a Western one, is the feeling of connectedness and peace despite everything that wants to break it apart. And the joy is we still belong to each other, even though the world has taught me to hate you. I think when you can be there, and it's sometimes I think the English word joy doesn't do it for me. It's too effervescent. What I understand by what they were saying was much more calm and deep and connected, and I was really grateful for that. I find English is not always the best language for certain things.
Yeah.
But that's what I saw when joy, for me, joy is despite all of our brokenness and the world's desperateness to break us apart, we are made whole in the relationship with each other. Yeah. I think that's joy.
So Dr. Niles, I would agree with that. And I think Archbishop Desmond Tutu would as well. One of the words that he used in that was particularly Ubuntu. And he went on to explain how that is just humans living together. And if we seek to find ways to live together, then we are, indeed creators of that joy. And so that makes a lot of sense. Now, if I add in my understanding of joy, I believe that joy is found where we are willing to experience wisdom, and that wisdom comes from others, right? I think that there's some wisdom that's embedded in us, but it's also engaging and in dialogue and in conversation with others' wisdom. And along with that wisdom, we allow and create spaces of curiosity. And that place of curiosity is where we are then able to create joy. So that might be, a form of, is joy created or is it manifested? But I do believe that we are creators of joy as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Williams. I couldn't help it, when Dr. Niles, when you talked about connectedness and joy as being a fundamentally relational virtue, I think that came through in the film. I don't know if it was just me, but what they were saying was one thing, but just how they were acting with each other, there was just a joy to that. Words aside, you could see the joy coming through each of them just as they related to each other, even in the midst of sort of recounting moments of significant pain. And so I thought that was demonstrated just in the film, that idea of joy being related to connectedness. Rori, I saw you shaking your head. What about you? As you think of joy and from your own tradition, how do you think about that word?
I don't know if I can give a better definition than what has already been said, because joy is such a profound term. But I can't help, when you asked about our tradition, I can't help but reflect on the fact that in the Hebrew Bible, we're given holidays and we're commanded to be joyful on holidays. But there's actually one holiday where the Hebrew Bible says that God commands to be nothing but joyful. And it's the holiday of Sukkot that we call it in Hebrew. It's the holiday that celebrates, we'll build booths and we'll sit outside and we'll live outside for 7 days. But what's really interesting about it is that every other holiday on our calendar, it commemorates a certain anniversary. It's the Exodus from Egypt. It's when we received the Torah on Mount Sinai. It's when the world was created. It's whatever it is. And Sukkot is the only holiday that doesn't celebrate an anniversary. It celebrates the long trek that the people took through the desert for 40 years. And the commentaries say that what it really is celebrating is it's the day in and day out. It's the building camp and the taking down camp and the making lunches and the cleaning up lunches, right? That's where we're actually commanded to find joy, right? It's one thing to say, okay, on the anniversary, right, we're waiting for these momentous occasions, but actually the real joy in our lives comes from all of these other moments, right? It's like people who say, right, they want their wedding to be the happiest day of their life. And then you think, well, what about the rest of everything that comes after? And that's what I felt in the relationship between these two men, right? They had all experienced these incredible highs and these incredible lows. And the joy that exuded through them was just sitting with one another on a Tuesday morning, right? It was just, and so it's the deep connection, but it was the ability to have joy in the everyday, in just the moments. That to me, that's what I took out from my own tradition, right? That's actually the moments when we can access this deep, deep joy, because that's when we really are just, it's not the exception to the rule, and it's not when we're living a different life. It's when we can actually just be our truest selves and access just what our lives are in every moment.
Yeah, agreed. Imam, anything that you want to add? The word joy for you and from your own tradition, how do you understand that?
Joy, and I understand, like when the person is comfortable and satisfied with his action, with his deeds and surroundings. And especially when are you doing the kind of the work of kindness to helping each other, like, when you lift the oppression or difficulties from others person, let's give you some joy because you feel like you did the right things. And if any person do the wrong things, they cannot have a joy. They feel guilty.
On that, Imam, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. Dr. Williams put in the chat, joy is baking a cake with your mom. I was thinking as each of you were talking, it's one thing to describe joy or to define joy or to talk about where we find it. But, I don't think joy just comes naturally. I mean, in the film even seemed to indicate that there are things that we have to do. There are practices that put us in the presence of joy or lead us down a pathway to joy. And we can just as easily, I think, be led down a pathway to cynicism or hopelessness. And the film sort of talked about that joy is not inevitable necessarily. There are practices or habits that lead us there. And so, Imam, I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about what are some of the practices that you think lead one to finding joy or cultivating joy?
I think so. If people are building the trust and the friendship, but especially like if they are training themselves to do whatever is possible good to others, whatever he is wishing for himself. It's our religion is teaching us, like, wish for others same or even more and better than for your own self. So in that case, you feel kind of comfortable and enjoying the things because you're doing the right things. You are helping those who are in need and you feel joy in it. It's for me, it's kind of from a religious point of view, but also it's just a practical life. When you have the comfort with the people and surrounding around yourself. That is the joy on the highest level.
Yeah.
Because
Dr.
you feel just like if you get in some difficulties, there are numbers of people who will help you out. So you feel so enjoying your surroundings.
Yeah, I mean, I hear in that answer if joy is relational and about connecting, then there's work that goes into actually seeking out other people, especially when we're trying to cultivate joy in our own life. And Dr. Williams, besides baking a cake with your mom, which is a great answer, are there other practices that you really think help you or can help us to stay in a place of joy or lean into joy?
Absolutely. So the film spoke quite a bit about suffering and tragedy and just the mundane, everything happenings of everyday life. And so in that, then I think that means that we have to have daily practices. And so for some, it's reading Psalms 23 every day. For some, it is a morning meditation. For me, and some of the practices in which I encourage is taking a pause during the day, simply taking a pause. And you can prescribe it to a particular time of the day, but it's being intentional on taking a pause to daydream. So daydreaming is usually, for some, it has a negative connotation. We're too old, we have adults, we have responsibilities. But daydreaming allows you to calm, find a place of groundedness where you are, to then become able to imagine what is possible. How might you go and then create joy, follow joy? But I believe that just like practices of, so there's something now that's called the nap ministry, because we're so tired all the time that we are encouraged to take naps. So much like there's a ministry of naps, I do believe that there is a ministry and a practice of daydreaming that allows our brain and our conscious to just relax, to regenerate, to find joy.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea of daydreaming. Rori or Dr. Niles, either of you think about habits or practices that help you to cultivate joy?
If I may, it was powerful to hear Sonia say baking cake with your mom. I'm at a point where my mom is not my mom anymore, and the practice of baking cake with her is no more there. And as I do the pain of that losing by inches, I'm still reminded by my own spiritual leaders, open your heart stretching, daily heart stretching that allows pain to go through, then allows you to get more than the pain. Often when you crunch in is when you feel more pain. When the heart opens, daily heart opening practices, which means that you actually confront all the things that are coming at you and let them wash over you. I think they're very important. So the pain doesn't become the enemy. And if you notice, the pain becomes part of the learning to have a bigger heart. And I want to just follow it with a story of my own. It's something like what they went through. So I come from Sri Lanka and I'm a Tamil. And part of my country's wish is that I learn to hate all Sinhalese people. And I can't be a good Sri Lankan unless I hate them. And the Sinhalese, the majority race, can only be real Sri Lankans if they hate me. And it's not hard. I assure you, it's not hard. But because I am among a community who work their hearts, I began to realize, so I have many dear friends. One who I do this work with around Sri Lanka is a Sinhalese Baptist scholar of Buddhist intent, and I am a Tamil Presbyterian scholar of Hindu intent. And when we were talking about what was going on, we found ourselves we were in a room in Geneva, Switzerland, of all places, talking about this, and we found ourselves moving closer and closer and having to literally hang on to each other, physically hang on to each other to hold on to our humanity and hold on to our ability to keep our hearts open. And for me, that moment meant everything. And it's a moment that I practice daily, because hating is not hard. Feeling pain is a very different thing. And hating is with a closed heart. Feeling pain takes an open heart.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in just a minute, Dr. Niles, and I'm gonna pivot back to this idea of the relationship between pain and joy. But Rori, I want to give you a chance if there were any practices that you were thinking about that for you help you to cultivate joy or lead you to joy.
One of the big keys that I found in the film was that they talked a lot about this idea of cognitive reframing, right? That, and I think we've sort of touched on this, right? This idea that like this is a choice that we make, and that there's ways that we can get ourselves to continue to make those choices. I think for me, some of those include, I agree with daily reflections, and I think I love the idea of daydreaming. I absolutely love that. I need to join this nap ministry now. I'll need more information about that. But even just moments of appreciation, right? Just stopping to just like list 3 things that you're really grateful for in that moment, I think is just, it's a way we get so caught up in our days, and it's so easy to keep running forward and to just pause and reflect. But for me, I think a big part of it is really ritual. And I think that can be opened in any kind of different rituals. But I've been thinking about what was said about joy being about connection. And for me, I think it is very much connection on this horizontal plane, but there's also a connection. I don't know exactly what this other plane is, but some kind of connection to history, connection to those who came before, connection to knowing that some of the actions that we're doing are actions that, so I was thinking about this, Dr. Williams, as you were talking about baking the cake with your mom, right? That for me, like part of what sparks joy in that is, right, it's the connection to another person, but it's also maybe the memories of remembering having done this before, or remembering what it was to do this when you were younger, or remembering when my grandmother was also there, or remembering when my mom would tell stories of doing this with her mom, right? That all of those are also so ways that we start to create ritual, that then those rituals become those moments where we start to create those memories, and then soon it becomes the times where we're now remembering the times that we did things, whether it's with friends, with our own children, with our community, that I start to feel that deeper connection that allows me to access that joy.
Thank you so much. So I'm picking up on this idea, both in Dr. Niles and then Rori, and what you just said, this connection, and it's certainly a connection the film makes between suffering and joy, pain and hardship, moments of pain and hardship in life, and the ability to cultivate joy. And, you know, Gail said in the chat, suffering was described in the movie as an opportunity for gaining compassion. You know, an opportunity to actually move forward with joy. And I found it profound. I mean, of course, at the center of the Christian tradition is a relationship between, you know, suffering and joy. And I'm wondering if panelists, if you can talk a little bit about that connection. Dr. Niles, I think your story powerfully got to it, but what is the connection between suffering, hardship, pain, and joy? Because I think most of us think of those things as kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum, but in the film, they were really connected. Does someone want to go first on that one?
Let me try and go, take it from the, you know, these are 2 men who had violence, had suffering placed upon them, and they found compassion through it. When I don't know why Steve asked me to do it, but I do know that Mary Shaldor Blaufuss asked me for a statement when Desmond Tutu died, and that moment, I was literally in a service for a man who died 100 years ago, was born 100 years ago, who was Sinhalese, one of the majority race. And he's one of two people in the country, Christian ministers in the country, and it connects also to Truth and Reconciliation. It made me connect to Desmond Tutu. When the violence against my race happened, they were trying to genocide my whole race and did a good job of getting there. These two leaders of the majority race felt the suffering so badly and felt their suffering because of their hearts that they got up and gave public statements of confession. Soma Pereira was one of them. They said, I break because my Tamil brothers and sisters' blood lie on the ground. And it released him to be able to love again. And for me, that's so powerful. And it, on the other side, until I could feel my rage and my anger and hear their confession, I couldn't love them anymore. And that moment, so the pain, suffering can be an opportunity to open the heart or shut it down in rage. And I think, and we know, and I know what it does to me when I shut down. And imperfection is my middle name. Shutting down is what I do best. But when I am trying to be the person that I want to be in the world and I want to be in the world with, it's okay, this hurts, I am angry, there is pain here. It can break you or it can help you to become something else. And that's not, and that happens from both sides. It comes from all of us hurt people, as the Imam said so much. It was so clearly. Asking forgiveness, I want the forgiveness, but I also am proud of myself for actually being able to say, I hurt people. I need forgiveness. And even if they don't forgive me, at least I'm not hiding like, I'm really a good person who did a bad thing. No, I sucked. When you are destroying lives, you suck. And you need to be able to say that, at least be honest to yourself, no matter what else is going on. I think that's very important. And I think a lot of the fragility we talk about right now in the world by people of privilege is, I didn't mean it and I'm really a good person. No, but you suck. You did some really sucky things, and you get to live in the world because the systems are made so you can suck. I mean, I think that's really part of the reality. Okay, sermon done, shutting up now.
Well, I know I'm going to go around this week telling people they suck. Dr. Niles told me it's important for us to recognize that. But I think I think what you say is...
The theological correct word, so you sound like a minister, Matt, is you sinned.
Oh,
then
sin.
You sound better.
Right, yes. We all suck and have sinned, but there's something profound about our own internal recognition of brokenness and weakness and falling short. That in some ways, I think you're right. It takes down our own defenses. It maybe dismantles a little bit of pride, and there's joy at the bottom of that. Ultimately, I think a certain freedom in a way that comes from the pretense no longer needing to be held up. Imam, I'm wondering for you, any thoughts from you on the relationship between suffering, joy? I mean, I'm thinking too, the movie, I think in a few spots it even went a step further, almost as if pain is necessary in some ways, or hardship is necessary for us to discover joy. And Imam, how do you think about that relationship?
It is just like different experience. Like you see, when we have the kids and we take them for a soccer practice and a game, We want them all the time to win. We don't want them to lose or to suffer or things like that. What is not good, they have to experience also to lose, and there is the other side also. But also sometimes parents are more suffering than really their own kids through all these games and the simple things. So, but I want to also like to add up on Dr. Niles, is confession is very important. It's a part of reconciliation. We see today like many conflicts around the globe between small and the bigger groups and nations and so on, and how to reconcile. But it's very important to come to reconciliation. It's basically confession of those who did the wrong and show the sincerity. They will never do it again, and they want to build the society with who will enjoy the life more. So that's how I understand it's very important. In many cases, actually, they don't focus on confession. They just try to emphasize, let's do reconciliation, but it's almost impossible to do it.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, what do you think? Relationship between pain or suffering and finding joy?
His holiness, in the film, he talked about, he really tried to explain this tragedy piece and how that is primarily related to suffering. And the word that he used was, I'm not convinced it was a complete sentence, but he said it's an opportunity to destine you. And I thought that was very interesting. So you have this suffering. So what I took from it was, in life, we can't get away from suffering or tragedy. It's either we're living in it, we're going to encounter it, we're going to overcome it, but it's something that we all are going to encounter. So if that is so, then we have to take it to destiny. So I had to try and figure out what that meant. And so for me, I interpret it in a way of saying that I think it was a powerful piece to say it was to destine me, because it helps me to see my role in the future. It affirms me that I have a future, that I can overcome, or I will overcome, or I can be assisted in overcoming, or with others in community, we can get through and overcome and see a future, So, if you go back to the beginning of the film, it showed His Holiness, escaping. He was running away, but he, was determined to get somewhere. And so he had to have that destined or determination to keep going. And so that allows, it gives me the permission and acceptance that I have an ability to participate in my own future or creating my future.
Yeah, thank you. Rori, anything you want to add about that relationship?
So this was the part of the film that I struggled with the most. I actually had a really hard time with some of these pieces. And in hearing all of you reflect, it's helping me to shape some of my thoughts. And what I'm coming back to is actually Imam Hasic, what you started us off with, of the, forgive but don't forget, right? When you reminded us of that piece of it, because I think that's sort of what I'm carrying with me in this, in that, yes, I agree that I think that suffering has the ability to bring us to compassion, to make us better people, to help us appreciate joy more. Yes. And that doesn't mean that I have to be grateful for the suffering, right? And I think also going back to like what Dr. Niles said, right? If I have caused you suffering and you have become a better person, I didn't do you a favor. I still sucked, to use your technical language, right? Like, you rising above that suffering, these two men taking the situations that these men had to go through were avoidable human creation. I think it's very important that we have to talk about that, right? People made choices. They made choices to go to war. They made choices to oppress people. They made choices to do violence against people. They made choices to do violence against these men. And so I don't want to say that because they rose above that, they use those as opportunities to do greatness in the world, does not mean that that suffering was therefore a good thing, right? I think that the world could still have been a better place. Maybe they would not have been the people that they were in how the way that we know them. And I think there still could, we should still be striving that no one should ever have to run away from their home or face that kind of oppression or face that kind of treatment or I mean, the horrors that each of them faced. And so that's the yes and that I want to hold, right? Yes, you can rise above your suffering. And yes, you can still say that that suffering is wrong and that we should do everything in our power to eliminate suffering. Because I struggle with when people say that they're grateful for the suffering or that the suffering did something good, then it almost excuses our need to fight that suffering, right? And I think we should never become complacent to that suffering in the world, and that we should all be called upon to eliminate it, especially because I think it's important to also, the other piece that I also struggle with is that if there is a person who faced similar struggles and didn't rise to these levels, I don't fault them for it, right? They didn't fail, right? This was not a test that one of them passed and the other one failed, right? Like that's not, so yes, be grateful for the ways in which you have accessed that challenge in your life and risen above. But that's never something that we should ever excuse or fault somebody for, or in any way except in our universe.
You're also seeing too here a little bit into the interfaith tradition. Suffering in the Fertile Crescent religions is an act. Is sometimes, well, what we do is a sacrifice language around suffering. We sacrifice ourselves. Jesus died on the cross in my tradition. So that's one tradition. But if you go back and look at it, the person who talks about it first is the Dalai Lama. And in Buddhism, suffering is, right? It's not a sacrifice. It's not a martyrdom. It just is. And enlightenment is the realization it is and how to move forward. So you're watching a particular faith tradition come out of one worldview, and another faith tradition's like, I can use that, right? To the Christian saying, I can use that, so in spaces of suffering, so he's really working out of a Buddhist tradition and not a Western Christian tradition, so to speak. And that makes a big difference because yes, I've heard a lot of Western Christianity say, suffering is how, you martyr yourself and sacrifice yourself and become a servant. That's not what the Dalai Lama is doing. And I think Tutu is connecting with him at that level. It's a different faith tradition speaking out of, because what are the tenets of Buddhism? What's the straight one? The world is suffering. That's the, So what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I'm reminded too, and Beth actually pointed this out in the chat, that the Dalai Lama and both men really, and Rori, you get at this, talk about not just like personal suffering, like I have to suffer in order to experience joy, but when we respond, we have choices about how we respond to suffering in the world. And I think at one point, and Beth, this is what you quoted, I think in the chat, that the Dalai Lama said, joy is the reward of seeking to give joy to others. I think Tutu, it talks about it in terms of compassion, that when we respond to the suffering around us with compassion, joy is a benefit or a reward. I remember him talking about, I can't remember exactly how he said it, the good selfish and bad selfish or something like that. And so joy, it's not necessarily like I have to, seek suffering out in my own life in order to experience joy, but more like we have choices about how to respond to the suffering around us. And when we respond with compassion, it also is a pathway to joy. And Rori, you reminded me of that part because in that sense, this connection doesn't give us permission to sort of not do anything about suffering, but actually to engage it with works of justice and compassion. Anything else? Dr. Williams, do you want to add anything about this connection between suffering and joy?
Not necessarily. I want to affirm what Dr. Niles talked about, from the perspective in which you are listening to it and interpreting it, right? So I think that is phenomenal. So from a Western perspective, When I hear the words compassion, and it's dangerous to let go of the compassion, which Dalai Lama was explaining, I think it is easy to interpret that as, oh, this is how I need to move forward. But listening to what Rori is saying, is absolutely essential to do a root cause analysis of why did this stuff, that's a nice word of saying it, even happen? Why did it start? And going back to the origination of it. So absolutely, it is a both and.
Yeah.
Get it?
Dr. Niles, I want to circle back to you if I can, because I think you point out, and I think it's good for us to note that in the film, there were two different religious traditions, and there are times at which they just really came at things differently. For me, the moment where I saw that was when the young woman was standing before both of them, sharing a really heartbreaking story of being taken away from her parents and now being orphaned at the Tibetan school, I think it was. And, Archbishop Tutu just responded with just this sort of deep compassion and understanding and just listening and sort of sorrow. And the Dalai Lama just sort of said, well, this is actually an opportunity. I mean, that he did that cognitive reframing, like right in front of us. And it was just two very different ways, not right or wrong, just two different ways of responding to that. And so I'm thinking about, and you point out, some of the differences. And, at Eden, we talk about, one of our infused values is, this idea of interfaith collegiality, and not just collegiality really, but collaboration and working together. I'm just curious, what did the film teach you, or did it say anything to you about, what interfaith relationships look like? And did it inform at all about how we actually work together, even in the midst sometimes of differences?
I have to always remember to mute and unmute. This
Yes.
does not come naturally to me. So forgive me. It was wonderful to see two friends of different faiths honoring each other in the faith that they are in. And that for me is collegiality. I often get very frustrated when I work with interfaith groups in the West, because it seems like a bloody bad bar joke. A rabbi, an imam, and a priest get together in a bar and they solve the problems of the universe that's not it. It is the relationships between us, and that need to be, so let me do it a different way. One of my friends, because of the culture we come from, we end up doing a lot of interfaith ceremonies, weddings in particular. And I saw that in the sharing of how to deal with, so the Dalai Lama did it on the meditation of death, what it means to be in a space of death. And Tutu did it by doing Eucharist. The honor that both men gave to something that is not theirs and feels very strange to them, but with a just gentle curiosity, what will that do to me to learn about this? Not become it, and I think that is what collegiality is, to honor that you are different than me and you have much to teach me, and that I'm different from you and I have much to teach you. So let me do it this way. On good days, Dr. Williams and I are good friends, and I have a lot to learn from her, but I don't want to become her, and vice versa. And interfaith conversation is that similarity place in the middle, the place where we can commune, touch heart to heart. There's this wonderful book, I'll put it in the chat. It's by a man named, and I just lost his name. Damn it! The book is called A Good and Generous Faith. Sorry, but it really is about how does my heart touch your heart. Interfaith collegiality is about how our hearts touch each other. Did you know? Think back to when Tutu was talking about the death of his father. And the Dalai Lama went into a space of meditation and holding him. He used his tradition to connect to Desmond Tutu. That is what interfaith is. So in my faith, what I know of the best of my faith, I will hold you in your faith. When we do weddings, we'll often say to the groom who is of one faith, your job is to let your bride be the best of her faith that you can be. And her job is for you to be the best of your faith. So if you're going to be in a relationship, you have to know each other well enough so you can help, I pray, my Jewish friends to be the best Jews that they can be. And I hope they hold me in a way that lets me be the best Christian I can be. And not only just, and that's what interfaith space means to me. And I saw that embodied with those two men,
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's very important. Sorry.
Yeah. I think I dropped the right book into the chat, but you can correct me if I got it wrong. But one of the other panelists, any of you want to chime in on, I don't know, how did the film point a way forward, or did it inform at all for you what interfaith collegiality looks like? Not just talking to each other, but actually working together. Did it inform that for you in any way?
I'm happy to jump in on this. Yes, I mean, I think I just want to echo everything that Dr. Niles said, especially because I'm very used to, as someone who is Jewish, going into spaces where, when you're part of a minority tradition, you learn to translate your language into other people's language, or translate your practices into other people's practices. And so what does it actually look like to see these two people exactly like you just described, like to allow themselves to just be their whole selves, right? It's not about, because so often, we have to do that. And then I feel like, I didn't actually give them like my experience, right? Or it's hard because sometimes to actually experience my faith in the way that I practice my faith might involve you being uncomfortable because it's a different language, or because we might sit in a way that's not the way that fits in with your values, or fits in with your comfort level. And exactly right. Like, what does it mean to say? I remember one of the first times somebody was sort of kind of giving me feedback about it, and I thought, I didn't ask you. Like, I asked you to just experience what I'm experiencing. I didn't ask you to then tell me if you liked it. I don't care if you like it, because I'm not asking you to do it. I'm asking you to just see me, right? To just see me. And that to me also was like part of that joy. It was the teasing, it was the comfort, right? It was the being who they totally are, and being able to enter that space as who they totally were. And it was beautiful to see the ways that kept on sort of going in the film, right? I think the moments also you described of the different ways that they held each other at different moments, the different ways that they responded to this young girl, right? The ways that it was constantly kind of this dance of like, when do I step back because this isn't my space and I just need to let them be them? And when do I bring my whole self because that's what I have to contribute to this space, even if that's not who they are in this space, right? And what at the core for me was that it came from a place of love and of genuine desire to see the person for who they were, not through their own lens, but really for who they were as a person. And that is not something that many of us do well. It's not something we strive to do. We're always seeing things through our own lens, right? We all come into spaces saying, how do I feel about it? How does it remind me of my own upbringing? Or it reminds me of a trauma I had, or it reminds me of the upbringing I didn't like, or whatever it is. And we don't just say, I love you. Let me see what you see. Just let me see you and your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rori. Dr. Williams or Imam, either one, how did this inform the way that you see interfaith, not just collegiality, but collaboration, working together?
It is, if I may, it is very important to build the trust and the friendship. And you come to that level, you are not scared from each other. So one of you will come on a moment and say, only right way is his way, or he want to save you, or on the end, he wanted to probably convert you just to protect you, like, and so on, you know. Once time when you get that barrier, like you are so comfortable with each other, and there is so many things in the common. Probably 90% of our life, it's common between all the human beings. So there is so many fields where we can work together to elevate or mitigate the suffering and build the trust between all the people. And before, when we talk also about, I just want to mention about suffering is when you see injustice and the suffering, you cannot just like say, okay, that's not my business. That's actually your duty to protect or eliminate the suffering physically, if you can. If you cannot physically, it's your duty and responsibility. This is a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It is your duty and responsibility to encourage the others with advice who are able to mitigate suffering or stop the suffering. If you cannot do these two things, then the third thing is do not allow your heart to be infected to that level. So you have a feeling suffering, it's a normal, because it's happening every day, happening all around us. So your heart should be the pure and all the time trying the best to stop the suffering. And Prophet said that this last one, third one, it's the weakest faith.
Dr. Williams, do you want to add anything to what's been said about that relationship between people of different faiths, how this film maybe, I don't know, informed the way you understand that?
I think both the film and this gathering in this moment in time is enlightening in that it sounds as if, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I see head nods and yeses and nos, so please feel free to correct me, is that we have a responsibility maybe to just sit in with, like that is the interfaith moment, is to sit in the moment with the other, not to change, not to correct, but to experience the wisdom, to experience the sadness, to experience even the injustice, if I'm hearing Imam Mohamed correctly, and to sit there. And I think that is part of the opportunity to collaborate in interfaith spaces.
So, Rori, I want to come back to you because a couple questions ago, I thought what you said was so important about suffering and not getting too, I don't know, not to let a malaise sort of settle in about suffering. And I'm curious because both of these men in the film, joy for them was not an excuse not to engage. It wasn't a way to sort of dismiss or grow comfortable with the suffering around them. It really led both of them to engage and confront suffering and injustice, really, and oppression. And I'm thinking about, a second one of those infused values at Eden is challenging oppression. And can you talk a little bit more about how did the film, I don't know, did the film speak to you at all about or inform for you anything about how we do that? What did it say to you about what we do in the face of suffering or injustice?
Well, I think there's a number of things that I heard in the film in terms of what we do in the face of injustice. And the first and most fundamental is choose not to accept it. I mean, that's really right. And I think that's a really important point, that while these two men recognize that their own suffering was a path for them to really rise above and to grow, they didn't then say, well, all the other people should follow our path and we're going to let these systems stay in place, right? They then committed their lives to basically say, that's not the world that we believe, right? That's the daydreaming maybe that Dr. Williams said earlier, right? It's they saw the world for what it could be, right? They didn't see the world, they saw what it was, they didn't deny it, but they saw the world for what it could be. And they then did everything in their power to try to bring that world to fruition. And that included not being afraid to speak out, to continue to share, to say their vision, not to allow anyone to silence them, to continue to empower other people to say their visions, to tell people that they were valued and worthy and good and wonderful and loved, right? I mean, just putting all of that into the world. But I think, you know, coming back to our theme of joy, one of the biggest things that they did to overcome it was that they chose to continue to be joyful. Not as a result of, not in spite of, right? It wasn't like to spite everyone, because that would also be different, right? Like they're sitting together and laughing. That wasn't a political move. That was just that they in their lives said, we're going to continue to find these moments. We're gonna laugh and tease each other and make fun of each other, and you know, we're going to find love and friendship. And so that to me is one of the biggest ways that we fight, is that we decide what we want to see in the world, and then we bring everybody along with us, and we treat everyone as if they are the people that we know that they are, even if they haven't been told that yet. And we bring about the reality.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Imam, I thought what you said was really powerful. I was trying to write it down, you know, that you're talking about, you know, when we see suffering, it's our duty to confront it. How did the film for you sort of inform that idea of challenging even the conditions that lead to suffering for others? You use that word eliminate suffering, which I thought was really powerful.
Everybody can give it a part of it, like as we saw it in the film. Bishop Desmond Tutu, he gone through the apartheid. He didn't give up. He also like try his best, whatever he can do to stop that injustices there. And during his lifetime, actually, it was succeeded. So he was going also through the path of the suffering and watching the others suffering. But in the meantime, trying his best to find the way not to make it worse or suffering of more people or others, but try to pull the society like toward with a common ground, like, you know, to pull everyone regardless of the background, racial or religious or so on. You know, when something is wrong, it's wrong for everybody. You cannot make it right.
Dr. Niles or Dr. Williams, anything you want to add about what the film might have taught you about that idea of actually challenging the oppression or the suffering around us?
Dr. Williams?
Sure. You know, so there was a place in there where it showed a picture of Desmond Tutu as a young man. And then the next time you see him, he was more sagely. He had a few more years on him. And I think that was an example of a demonstration that we almost have to be committed with our whole lives to the purpose of fighting and not just fighting, changing, doing the work of. I had a student in my classroom today from, I believe, India. And she says, you know, Westerners talk too much. They talk about talking about it. That's all they want to do is discuss it. Where is the work being done? And so we elaborated on that conversation, and I so enjoyed it. But to do that, I think we have a responsibility to show up with our whole lives. And that looks different for different people, but it's our whole lives that has to be engaged in this work. And I think that these two men demonstrated that for us, committing their whole lives.
Yeah. But Dr. Niles, did you want to add something?
Well, as Dr. Williams talked, I remembered a story said by Kosuke Koyama, where a bunch of Christians went to talk to a Buddhist monk, and they were trying to explain Christianity, and they went to the Gospel of John, and we're talking about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then he said, stop. This seems like a very noisy religion. And I was like, we taught... the thing is not, again, friendships the reason I do my work is because I've got to connect to people, because I'm a minority Christian. I come from a country where 2% are Christian, much larger percent are Buddhist and Hindus. So I have to relate to other people if I want to have friends. There's just not enough Christians to go around, and I'm related to most of them. So this sense of being friends with people of other faiths is so important for the health of our lives. And we learn so much from each other. And part of that is, now, even in Buddhism, suffering exists, but also remember, how do we get joy? By giving joy and compassion to others. There's your social transformation. We want, in a world of suffering, to bring joy to others. Maybe for the selfish reason, so we can have joy, but really the joy of others is what gives us joy too. And you see that in both men from their own spaces. And I think that's important. So Matt, as a good Christian, I'll do the Christian thing. The systemic evil is, the way we become well is to work against sin and brokenness, right? There's the Christian. Buddhist, suffering is, how do we move past and do better than just being in cycles of suffering? So that I saw both of those there, and I watched each kind of go, note to self from what I heard from him, and note to self what I heard from him. And I think that was the beautiful moment. They weren't alone. They had each other, and they had so many other people. I think that for me was cool.
So for all of you that are listening, I'm going to ask a last question, and then if you have questions for each panelist or a particular panelist, please feel free to drop those in the chat because we'll have a little bit of time left. But I want to shift gears a little bit for this last question and get personal maybe. I mean, the last sort of infused value that we talk about around Eden is really wanting to build vocational resilience, which I love that phrase, resilience, for the work that we do. And I thought one of the most inspiring things for me is just, here's two men that are old. They've lived through decades of this. And in some cases, much has changed. And in certain cases, not much had changed. And yet, here they were, joyful, laughing, playful, joking, kind of maintaining a disposition of joy, still both fully engaged in the work that God had, called Tutu to, and what the Dalai Lama had been raised to do. I mean, and they were both just so engaged, I thought, with their work after all those years. And I know for me personally, I just sort of pray that as the decades go by, I can bring that same sort of joy and energy and sort of rigor to the work of ministry that I do. And so I just wondered if each of the panelists could talk just maybe for this final question, sort of, did the film offer you any practices or thoughts or sort of insights that keep you fresh just for the work that you do? Because I think right now it's hard to, whether you're a synagogue, mosque, or church, whether you're a religious leader or a person at work or a parent, boy, resilience seems to be hard to come by. So any wisdom, any insights that just keep you fresh for the work that you do that might have come out of the film?
Well, I think to be persistent in doing the right things. And when you do the best you can, then regardless of the result, you feel satisfied and joy because you did your responsibility. Mm. So in that case, you enjoyed the life. But when people doesn't do whatever they can, that's the difference. Then they feel like guilt and all this, I could do this, I could do this. But they did the utmost, best they can. Then we feel joy in the life. They fulfill their responsibility. And that's what we are also as a clergy looking for.
Dr. Williams, any wisdom for you that came out of the film that just sort of keeps you fresh for the work that you do?
Absolutely. It was about being funny. It's about being silly. It's about returning to the space of being 8-year-old boys. You know, they giggled, they held hands, they asked each other questions. Well, what does that mean? And, and what did you do, back then? And so having a healthy dose, a healthy measure, maybe one of abundance of curiosity. Ask questions of others and of yourself, and really harness all of the wisdom that is available. We don't have to do this alone. We do not have to be individualized in our work, in our studies, in our faith. This is an opportunity to engage. It's an opportunity to really practice. Practice what it is that we preach. Practice what it is that we believe. And if we do that, then I believe that will allow us to create that space of joy. So again, be curious.
Rori, what about you? Film informed for you? Any insider wisdom about staying resilient?
Yes, and to everything that was said, but for me, the biggest was like, I want to build off of, right, not just like be that 8-year-old again, but like find the person who brings that 8-year-old out in you, right? Like the work, I'm going to say this from my own experience, but I don't want to at all, I cannot at all imagine what these two men had gone through in their life and the work that they've done in their life, right? And I know that I'm exhausted and I'm not even doing half of what they're doing. And you can't do it all the time, right? We do the work, and then you find the person who makes you laugh, and you find the person, these were two of some of the most reverent men who could then be completely irreverent with each other, right? And I loved that. Like, I love that, and that permission, right? That person who can kind of like tease.
Rory, they talked about sex. Did you hear that?
It was amazing. Like, it was that. It was like the person that you can just let go with, right? They were on camera and they could just let go. And that's what you need, right? Here were two of the leading voices of social justice in their generation. And they didn't take all their time to compare notes or talk about what they needed to do together or write an op-ed together. They just made fun of each other. And I'm sure they did the other things also, but find that person, right? Like you need your spiritual partners in the work, and you need your spiritual partners in the rest and the rejuvenation, because you can't get up to work if you don't give yourself that time to kind of rest and heal. And it's not just healing, it's to fill yourself again, right? This work can empty you, and you need those spaces that can refill you.
Yeah. Dr. Niles, how do you stay strong, resilient, joyful for the work you do? And did the film offer you any fresh insight on that?
Well, several things. For me, one of the things that I would call God did was she destroyed the church. The church is dying, thanks be to God. God is purposely decentering the church, which gives us a chance to stop being so damn full of ourselves and look to our brothers and sisters and go, hey, rather than me preach at you, how about we work together? And for me, that is great resilience. That's part of it. The other is, I love the generation that is they're in their 20s, and they're not trying to be a Presbyterian or a Methodist, let alone a Reformed Jew or they're not interested. They're much more, how do I find the sacred? And we're sitting, they're spiritualists, they're not religious, they're nuns, I'm like, they're people in curiosity. Get on the wagon with them. I love talking to some of the young people. Like I did, and I come from 6 generations of Christian ministers. We know this business. And I have these wonderful kids, my own niece, who found more space in Buddhism. And said, Pariyama, I'm doing this and this and this. Can I do that? I'm like, go for it. or why are you doing that? What are you learning? So when I'm not trying to make her a Presbyterian, which I'd never do because I would get shot for good reason, for very good reason, then you can actually be present in her journey and journey with her. We need to stop being institutions and find out how to be people on the way to, okay, Christians, people on the way, maybe we need to be on the way with other people other than fellow Christians of our race and ethnicity and country. I think that, for me, that's what gives me resilience. It's all of the fun stuff that I never got to do before. Here, I go to Global Foods because it makes me happy, because I'm not getting the food I always get at Schnucks. I can find out, what is this thing and how can I cook with it? That gives me resilience. But there you go.
Thank you. I'll just add real quick for me. Just one insight I had in the film is that you just can't be serious all the time. It's really tiring to be serious all the time. And I saw that in Desmond Tutu. He was like how he was in the film pretty much all the time. Now, when he got up to preach, he was intense. And when he was doing public work, he was intense. But otherwise, he was exactly what you saw in the film. And that was an insight of mine. Okay, we have like a few minutes left. So panelists, I'm not going to ask all of you every one of these questions. We're going to rapid fire a few of these. And maybe one of you can answer a question. And if another one of you has just a burning insight on that, jump in. But then I'll go to the next question so we can get a few of these in. So this question comes from Rachel. Do you have suggestions on the things that we can do to connect and build bridges of understanding between people of all faiths? So anybody want to take that? Do you have any suggestions on things we can do to connect and build bridges of understanding? Dr. Niles?
Don't build bridges with other faiths. Build bridges with cool people who may not be of the same faith as you. Faiths are not living things. People are living things, relationships. So here's a cool person. There's this wonderful person who comes out of the Reformed Jewish tradition. I want to know her because she's cool. And in that process, I get to know about what made her cool. And I'm going to guess part of it is her faith. Don't get to know faith or go do a PhD on Buddhism or Hinduism. Those are fun too. But if you want to know other faiths, just know cool people from those faiths. That's my fast answer.
I like it. The cool people. Anybody else want to add something real quick to that?
Invite your neighbor for a lunch or barbecue in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
A meal. I love it. Okay, another question. How much can we choose and create joy? This comes from Leslie. How much can we choose and create joy versus how much is joy a gift to us? As in a Christian understanding of joy is sort of a fruit of the Holy Spirit. So how much is joy something we can choose and create versus how much is it a gift? Anybody want to comment on that?
I talked a lot about the creation of joy. So I think some of that is based on one's faith tradition and beliefs. And so in some of our traditions, we do believe that joy is that gift. It's something that's given to us or falls upon us. And then there are others of us who take intentional steps towards it. So it might be if I take one step, then the Holy will take another step. So it's a practice that we can engage in.
Love it. Anybody else on that one? All right, this question comes from Bill. How can we experience joy when there's so much suffering in the world? That seems easy. One of you should have the answer to that.
I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Choosing joy is a choice that you make independent of every other choice that you make. And suffering is also something, right? These are things that exist. And so for me, it's the yes and, right? Like, yes, there is suffering in the world, and I'm going to do everything that I can to fight it, and I can be joyful along the way. I think there's this kind of fallacy, like people will sometimes have like, if I know that there's people in the world suffering, I can't I can't enjoy, right? There's people starving, so I can't enjoy this food that's put in front of me. Well, not enjoying this or not doesn't actually help that other person in terms of their suffering, right? So you need to do the fight. Like, absolutely. I think we all need to be part of ending suffering, and suffering, causing your own suffering doesn't actually help the fight, right? Like, so like I said before, I think like this is why the rejuvenation is so necessary. Be joyful, find the places to fill yourself so that you're able to be part of the fighting suffering the next day.
All right. Well, panelists, I want to thank you. I'm going to give you a last chance. I mean, this might be dangerous with 4 minutes left to honor our time. But I'm going to go around just one more time really quickly. Any last words? Kathleen even asked in the chat, how do we spread joy or send joy? Just any last words on joy that you want to share with everybody who's gathered here. Imam, I'll let you go first. Any last words on joy?
Enjoy the moments with your family and with your friends, and anybody comes in your way. Because once time when is getting in difficulties, many people regretted why they didn't enjoy the life together with their loved one and the friends. And they give the message to others. They saying like, use every morning, every day, whatever you can, tell to your loved one you love them. Repeat the things and have the joy to spend time with them.
Thank you so much, Imam. I appreciate that. Dr. Williams, any last word on joy?
I was trying to think about that, and I said, well, I wonder, could I buy cost at the low price of, could I buy joy at the low price of $9.99? And I said, I can't figure out where to purchase it. But I do think that there is a cost associated with it, and it's simple. It's time, it's openness, and it is a sharing of wisdom. And if we are willing to do that, then I think that that allows an opportunity for us to engage and receive joy.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Williams. Rori, any last word on joy from you?
I think joy, ultimately, it has to be something that comes from within. I think we utilize other things to help us get there, but ultimately it's something that comes from us. And that's why it's not something that changes because of the suffering around us, and it's not something that waits for somebody else to come along, right? These other things can help spark joy, and they can help us lose some of the joy, but ultimately it's something that we have already within us, that we always have the ability to access, and that we choose the ways that we try to cultivate that access. We choose the ways that we react to all of the elements in the world. So we should never forget that it's always there, and always there for, sometimes it feels out of reach, but it is always there for us.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Niles, you get the last word on joy. Anything that you want to offer?
Well, joy is contagious. If you can find the joy, when you look for joy, it finds you, but you give it to others. It's very contagious, probably much more than COVID. And we don't have to put masks up against it. If you enact joy, and also if you can't find joy, be around joyful people. You'll get it. I promise you. I've been in spaces where I have been beyond hopeless and joyless, and I've had very important people in my side. I'll be joyful for you until you can pick it back up. And I think that is true. Hang around joy, you'll get it, and you will share it. It's very contagious. And isn't that a wonderful thing?
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Niles, I'm mindful that you said one of the practices is be around cool people. You all are cool people, panelists. Thank you so much for taking your time and energy to answer questions today. Tough questions, really. And if we were all in person, we would clap for you. I'm going to applaud for you. And I know everybody else out there is dropping comments in the chat. Thank you so much for your time, your insight that you brought to this conversation. I'm really grateful that I got to ask the questions and I didn't have to answer them, and I just got to learn from you all. I want to turn it back over to Steve Lawler. Steve, do you have closing words that you want to share with everyone before our time comes to an end?
Oh, thank you, Matt. Just to let you know that we did record tonight, and we will be making that recording available if you want to listen to it again. I think all of us talked about the movie, and some people took notes, some did other things to remember pieces of it, and this conversation is profoundly rich in that way. And then also we'll be continuing to do things around interfaith collegiality and some of the kinds of things that animate our common life in and around Eden. And so look forward to some things coming your way for other conversations, other opportunities. And so I want to thank Matt and all the panelists for just the way you show up and your presence. And this is a night full of joy. So I hope the rest of your evening is filled with that. And thank you all for being here.